Ladies and gentlemen, Psalms 75 says, I am poor and needy. Make haste unto me, O God. You are my help and my deliverer. O Lord, make no tarrying. This was David speaking about being delivered from his enemies, from those who wanted to see his destruction. And he needed the help immediately. When you need help immediately, you don't try to dot your I's and cross your T's. No, you're in desperate need at that time. But it's interesting that David wanted deliverance from his enemies. And it's just so strange that Justice League had these detractors, these hypocritical detractors. I'll show you what I mean. So after Wonder Woman, there was this big hullabaloo over the Amazons and how they were dressed and how they were dressed down and how Zack Snyder was making a sexist statement on these women, stripping them down and they look almost naked and their bellies are out. But no one talked about Henry Cavill. We all know Henry Cavill was shirtless in Justice League, but not only in Justice League, actually. He was shirtless in the other two movies of the trilogy, particularly Man of Steel and also Batman v Superman. And so that's hypocrisy when these women come out, these so-called feminists. They're not feminists. And they start to bash the Amazons of Justice League. Now let's talk a little bit about that. About Henry Cavill's Superman. Here you see Superman here. And he really was awesome. I mean, it was just awesome watching Superman on the screen. And Henry Cavill is every bit of Superman. I mean, more Superman probably than any other Superman before. But when we look at him in Man of Steel, he was going by an alias of Greenhorn. We were introduced to him as an adult in Man of Steel. And what was interesting was Greenhorn's life was saved by another human being. And it's interesting because that set precedent to show, it was basically showing you the relationship between Superman, or Kal-El, who was known as Clark, but he had many other aliases at the time, and humanity. And so they start off by showing that humanity, when we are introduced to Clark, we are introduced to humanity saving or attempting to save his life, being kind to him. And then we see him reciprocate that kindness back to humanity, and he's shirtless in that scene where he saves the lives of some oil rig workers who were definitely going to die if they weren't found. And I found that very intriguing and interesting. Of course, when we see Henry Cavill, he, in the process, the rig goes down, he goes down with it, and eventually he comes out of the ocean, and this is the scene here. And I gotta say, you guys who are Incredible Hulk fans, Superman ain't no softy, man. There is no other Superman but Henry Cavill. Look at that. Look at that monster. Look at this hulking hulk of a man. When I first saw him, I was so impressed by it. I was like, God damn, that's definitely Superman. God damn. First time somebody's really doing it right. Some people say that's a man crush on him. I don't know about man crush, but I can tell you he looks impressive, okay? Seriously. Man looks like a beast. But what I want to show you is before and after Henry Cavill is shirtless. He was dressed as a traveler, as a fisherman, right? And then he adorns another structure. He adorns another dress, and he becomes a waiter in a bar. And I thought that was interesting because at that point in time in Man of Steel, Henry Cavill is a traveler. He's on a journey to find out who he really is. So I thought that was interesting in Man of Steel. However, when we see him in Batman v Superman, he has now adorned the attire of someone who is not only clean shaven, but someone who has settled down. He's going into an apartment, he's meeting Lewis. He's now found Lewis, and he has taken on now the image and persona of a reporter. Now you have to understand, the cool thing about Man of Steel and what Man of Steel sets the foundation for is showing you how flexible Clark can be. Clark can take on different mantles. Here he takes on the mantle of a fisherman. Then he goes and takes on the mantle of a waiter. And now we see that Clark has taken on a mantle which he will stay with because of his relationship with humanity once again, of a reporter. Lois Lane kept confident who he was, what his name was, and what his potential was. And because of that, in due kindness, he moves closer to Lewis in the Daily Planet, and now he is a reporter. He has other reasons for being a reporter, but he's a reporter. He's taken on that alias. It's very interesting. Clark actually has many different aliases. And even Clark himself, who is the name that the humans, as General Sud said, gives him. It's interesting that Clark himself, and Superman's a very complex character if you really think about it. But the name Clark itself is an alias. His real name, we will get to. But the alias of Clark itself is it's an alias. It's not really who he is, but he has accepted it and embraced it, and embraced himself as Clark because he lives on Earth. And you know, the philosophy of Jor-El is very interesting. There's a lot going on with Clark Kent. A lot going on with this guy. So anyway, the important thing is you see him come into the home. He's saying he wants to cook for Lois. He's brought flowers for her, and eventually they have a very interesting discussion about how the world sees him and how she sees him, and she's telling him it's how it appears. That's the important thing. That appearance is also as important as what actually happened. And so they are having that discussion, and she's wondering if she is really going to bring down his downfall or hurt his mission on Earth, because she knows what his mission is. Anyway, he becomes shirtless when he is there in the tub, and he's making love to her, right? So again, we see Clark, but this time we see that he has an attachment to humanity. So here, when we are introduced, humanity treats him kindly. He rewards the favor to humanity, but he has no specific attachment to humanity. Now, the interesting thing about Clark, if I were to go to a movie that I actually love, it's one of those cult classics for me, is The Matrix. And Neo was a type of Clark Kent, a type of Superman. And I will never forget that Neo and Trinity, they had this close, tight bond between them. And I feel like this movie, especially Batman v Superman, seems to reflect that same thing. That there's this specific person to which Clark is attached to, and that really draws him into attachment to humanity. Now, even when he didn't have Lewis there, okay, even when he didn't have Lewis there, he was attached to humanity. He was going to help humanity anyway. And there's so much more to Clark that I would like to talk about, but I can't talk about it right now in this video. We're talking specifically about Clark, shirtless, right? So here we have him here, and that demonstrates his attachment to humanity, and it's specific. It's attachment to Lewis. And then when we see him next, he's in the full-blown reporter mode. This here is him relaxed under his alias. You can see the glasses on, and then here he is, and he is again in his alias mode, but this time he's in reporter mode. So that's what before and after shows us. So he has settled down, unlike Man of Steel, where he was first a fisherman, and then he was roving, and then he became a waiter. Here he's a reporter. He has settled down. It's very important. Now, when we get to Justice League, we see yet another dimension of Clark Kal-El or Clark, whichever one you want to pick. He was dead, so he was in his funeral clothes, as you can see down there. And when he came to life, and he blew up and went up into the sky and came to life, he was once again shirtless. What an incredible specimen he is, because when you look at him, look at this freaking specimen of a man. I mean, geez and ages, man. Look at this. Look at this guy. I mean, he's the Incredible Hulk, I'm telling you, man. Look at this dude. He's huge. Massive. Okay? Literally looks like you ripped Superman from the pages. It is not just it's not just the bodysuit the guy wears on. The guy literally looks and is built like Superman. I don't think anybody else was built like that. It's impressive. Anyway, we see him again shirtless. But here's the interesting thing. He was in, of course, his funeral clothing. When we see him dressed in his adornment this time, he's dressed in the Clark Kent colors from the retro Superman. Of course, Clark always wears plaid, but it's interesting now you see him in the classical Superman clothing. But what's very interesting about this one is that, yes, he still has his attachment to Lois Lane. In fact, it's Lois Lane that grounds him back into humanity. And before this, of course, this is death here that symbolizes, and this is life that it symbolizes, and there's a tribute back to the 1978 Superman at the same point in time. And we see here Lois in the background and his mother in the foreground. But this time his relationship to humanity, these two women, of course, ground him in humanity. His relationship to humanity is in a different atmosphere. This time we have to ask ourselves, who is Clark going to be amongst men? We don't know. Even though I saw him dressed up almost, he was still in the glasses, the coat and stuff, and he looks like he's still a reporter. We don't know. And that's the nice thing about Justice League. And then at the very end of Justice League, we see him in this, what looks like the classic reporter outfit. Again, a tribute and a shout back to the 1978 Superman. But is he? What is Clark now? And that's the question. Now that he's the reincarnated Kal-El, Clark, who is he? What is he now? What is he taking on? Is he just himself this time as Kal-El Clark? Or is he a reporter again? What is he this time? And that's the question we're left with. And so I find this very interesting. Every time Clark is shirtless and then he takes on something, you learn a little bit more about him. And I thought I would share that with you guys in this video. Now there's another video I want to share, but I can't go into that too much in too many details at this point in time. Leave your comments in the comment section below. Share, subscribe, and enjoy your life. You guys have a great one.